Thank you, David. Thank you, Jerry, for putting this event on, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see a lot of people in the crowds and seeing that there's uptake and interest. The question I sort of asked myself is, what is the construction industry going to look like in 10 years? I guess maybe that's the wrong question, is what do we want it to look like in 10 years? I start with this slide. Basically, if BIM is disruptive right now, we have no idea how disruptive it's going to be in the next 10, 20 years. Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns predicts that by 2023, the average computer that's going to have the computational power of a human brain will cost $1,000. By 2040, a computer that has the power, the same brain power as all of humankind will cost $1,000. So just that as a disruptive innovation is something that we'll be able to, deep learning, machine learning, we'll be able to talk to our computers and they'll get stuff done. So I guess in that context, how do we look forward and how do we move forward? How do we keep, yes, grounded in the present, but a foot in the future? The first step is really setting that foundation to move forward and make sure that, well, we've set ourselves up for success. By the end of my talk, hopefully, we've heard that from the panel, BIM is a tool, BIM is a process, BIM is a technology. BIM is a catalyst. It's a reason to question what we're doing, question our practices. Once you start looking at BIM, you're starting saying, well, I want more collaboration. I need people to input data into, I need the mechanical trade, I need the electrical trade to input data. I don't want to be doing the modeling. So we have to start thinking of our organizational barriers. We have to start thinking about our process barriers and blowing those up. So it's really starting to make us think about how do we redefine our practice. For that change, we need to structure that change. We need a way to a framework for that change. And I know regulation and policy is a bad word, but bear with us. It's more of a loose policy and a framework. This framework for us at BuildingSMART and basically a sort of a vision is, what is the three key elements of this framework are a strategy. So where are we headed? What do we want to achieve? A mandate. We talk about a lot about owners not requiring BIM. We see the public bodies, at all levels being key in this transition, and based on solid BIM standards, and we can discuss what BIM standards are. We can discuss at will. So this Venn diagram of these three interlocking elements. Of course, BIM is a catalyst for change. I think we need to frame this within a wider scope, a national strategy for the built environment. Canada doesn't have that sort of framework, or where are we working towards and what do we want to achieve? For us, the roadmap is part of the way to get there, towards that national strategy and towards that common vision for a better and better performing industry. Just a bit about BuildingSMART. BuildingSMART Canada is a council to the Institute for BIM in Canada. So the IBC is a joint national committee with the major national associations. We are the operational arm of IBC. And we are part of BuildingSMART International, which regroups all these countries, so 17 chapters. So this sort of gives us a wide spectrum of experience. We can tap into tremendous work that's been done in Europe and in Asia to inform what we're doing here today. So why the roadmap? I think I can go about and just bandy about percentages, 30% waste on construction sites, 10 to 15% increase in cost of projects due to poor documentation, $15.8 billion worth of losses just due to data interoperability issues. I think the core issues here are we need to improve the performance of the industry, so how we deliver projects, and ultimately how we generate value. What is the outcomes of that process, and ultimately how do we produce a better product? Another thing is sustainability is a hot topic. It's the federal government is really keying in on sustainability as a driving force for innovation. So that's something that we need to really tap into. As a counterpoint, the UK, I think you may have heard of the UK. They just mandated level 2 BIM since the 4th of April. But they've done that for a reason. Their reason is quite simple. 33% lower cost. The Ministry of Justice, now they've been doing BIM for 5 years, they've consistently lowered their cost. They're now at 20% lower cost than market value due to BIM and procurement practices. 50% better project delivery, 50% lower emissions of CO2, and the kicker here, and to mirror what Duncan was saying in the panel, 50% improvement in exports. So they're wanting to look at how can we export our expertise. The other thing, the counterpoint to that is in Canada, unfortunately, we don't have very good data about where we're at. We don't know what the BIM adoption rate is and other innovative approaches. We performed a survey in Quebec last year. We had 521 respondents, which is pretty good for these types of surveys, and we found that 31% of BIM adoption rate. I think you've seen the McGraw-Hill that were at 80%. I think you've seen the NBS, which were at 67, 70%. The picture is much less than that. To me, these are more representational. And of course, who are the adopters? The larger corporations. And so we talked about SMEs being key in that adoption rate. Integrated approaches, lean design construction, so low adoption rate. So how do we promote those and how do we push those? One of the key sort of elements that we discovered through our looking at BIM across Canada is that there's no formal policy mandating BIM on all public projects. We've noticed that there are fragmented initiatives. There's Department of National Defense and DCC that are looking at BIM for space management and through Open BIM. Alberta Infrastructure, they were leaders in 2012. They had a clear agenda. It fell back, but the Royal Alberta Museum pilot project, they're looking at ways now ramping up that effort, looking at how to develop their BIM requirements, their validation and auditing processes, and so forth. The Société Québécoise des Infrastructures is an interesting one. They're looking at mandating IFC deliverables at tender in the fall, so I think they're going to be the first government body to actually start mandating a form of BIM. And the government of Saskatchewan, of course, with the Moose Jaw Hospital, which is a sort of a beacon there, really beacon of best practices. So as I was saying, fragmented initiatives across the industry. So limited rate of adoption across Canada, limited to specific portions of the supply chain. So general contractors are doing well, large engineering, large architecture firms are doing well. But what about the people that are building these things and really adding value in the supply chain? So that's, I think, a key place to focus. There's an inconsistent use of BIM across Canada, so very heavy in construction and in design. FM, we've heard it, is not so much of a use, and that's really where the pull is. Asset management, asset lifecycle management is the pull, and BIM use in the field is the pull. Variable level of maturity, of course, with that inconsistent use, we have different levels of maturity, and of course, not having that pan-national data, we don't know what that maturity and capability levels are. Ultimately, this hinders potential value for Canada. So that's sort of the context we come at from our perspective. Why do we need a roadmap? So what is a roadmap? I think the key element here is that we didn't produce this in a vacuum, and it's an initiative that BuildingSMART took, but it's not BuildingSMART's roadmap. It's the construction industry's roadmap, and we want ownership from everybody. We want ownership from all associations and everything as a way to move forward. Looking at who has been mandating just BIM around the world, you'll notice that Canada is absent from that. And accelerating mandates are coming online. So that's alarming. But on the other side, it's a great potential to go learn from these other countries. They have gone through the growing pains. We can leapfrog what they've done and not reinvent the wheel, not reinvent standards, not reinvent protocols and so forth. We have that there. So in developing the roadmap, we looked at these different initiatives across the world. The UK, they had a very clear roadmap. They've been working at this for 20 years. They started in the early 90s, questioning how their construction industry. So we have some catching up to do. Singapore, same thing. They were in the early 2000s. They've produced reports around what are the growing pains, or what are the pain points in the industry, and how can we change that? And so for them, BIM was one of those. Australia, very technocentric, but a lot of key points, and how do you develop this common data environment and these databases? And finally, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who had a more life cycle approach and more of a collaborative transition change management approach. So this sort of frames how we looked at it, learning from others. We produced a statement of intent. Basically, what's the rationale behind the roadmap? Why are we doing this? The importance of the construction industry and so forth. The key elements here are the 6 principles around which the roadmap is articulated. And basically, these are the 6 flux or 6 streams that you'll see in the roadmap. First is that we need engagement from everybody. And you being here today is that engagement. You're willing to learn. You're willing to move forward. We have to develop the technologies, the processes, and the standards to support that transition. We must educate. I think education was a key topic this morning. We need to educate and train people to use these tools and to really develop curriculum that'll support this transition. We need to deploy these tools in the conducive environments. So we talked about IPD a bit, but are there other contractual mechanisms? We can do BIM in a collaborative way in construction management. We can do it in design build. We can actually even do it in design bid build if it's required correctly, although that's not the ideal. The other thing is we have to evaluate our progress. So I talked about lack of data in terms of where are we at as a country, or where we're at as a province, or so forth in our transition. We need benchmarks. We need performance measurements. The last thing is that we need to sustain that transition. That's something that we saw that was absent from other roadmaps, is that once we've provided the impetus and once we've put the wheels in motion, how do we sustain it? And how do we make sure we're relevant and that we stay on top and that we can deal with, these disruptive changes such as deep learning, machine learning, and all the cool stuff that they're doing in Silicon Valley. So here's the roadmap, ultimately the 6 streams. I'll go through it. On the right, or on the left-hand side of the roadmap, you have the 6 streams that, and their description. On the left-hand side, right-hand side, sorry, it's still pretty early for me, the desired state, where are we headed towards? And ultimately, this is a transition state, but what are we aiming for? And these are our moving targets. Across the top, anybody who's familiar with capability maturity modeling is that we're not going to go from 0 to 100 tomorrow. It's a stepwise process. So we're going to step through these different states. Ultimately, we're trying to look beyond integrated, and get towards an optimized state as an industry. We have a timeline, 2020 plus being a timeline, 5 years. Is that feasible? Maybe it's a bit aggressive, but we need to work towards something. We did identify a couple of key elements on the roadmap that should happen, within the next year or two, and I'll go through those. And ultimately, then the activities around which the roadmap is articulated and which will deliver on that vision. So, moving through these streams, the first is engagement. So, to foster engagement from government, industry, and academia by promoting open standards for BIM in Canada, and I move that, to promoting better collaboration and better project delivery for Canada. As an example, 2 elements that are happening right now, and I speak also to the initiatives by CanBIM. So first off, BuildingSMART has free membership, so it's open to anybody. You can sign up, it's free, you can stay, we have a newsletter and so forth where you're keeping up to date on open BIM initiatives around the world. And we have the Affiliates Initiative, and that's connecting the regional BIM groups, and we have to speak to David at the end of this to see if Halifax BIM community, basically these are the grassroots level, and how do we connect into those and ultimately start crowdsourcing this change. The other thing is, so in terms of informing and outreach to community, CanBIM regional sessions, I think this is a brilliant venue. These are really well put on. There's monthly members community meetings from BuildingSMART side. These are online, so anybody can attend. There's newsletters. CanBIM has a newsletter. BuildingSMART has a newsletter. There's ways to keep up to date on what's happening. In terms of developing the guidelines, protocols, technical codes, and standards to facilitate and standardize the use of BIM in the Canadian AECO community. I come back to that first slide around the strategy. I mean, we need to understand where we're headed and what are the goals we're trying to achieve. Is it lower cost? Is it faster delivery? Is it lower carbon emissions? Why are we using BIM? You know, and there's sort of better coordinated drawings will lead to better project delivery, will lead to lower costs. So what is the ultimate outcome we're striving for? And that has to be captured within a BIM strategy or a national strategy for the built environment. And again, that's a crowdsourced effort. We need input from the industry. We're not going to go out and set these targets. We need to understand what is a feasible target and what's maybe be a bit ambitious, maybe put our heads out there a bit. There's a Canadian practice manual for BIM in terms of guidelines. There's the IBC toolkits. There are a couple of elements. There's the AEC BIM protocol that was done by CanBIM. This newest initiative, the Canadian practice manual for BIM, which is scheduled for release in fall, is a real crowdsourced effort. We had a lot of people from across the country contributing their knowledge to basically what is a foundation piece for what is BIM and what does it look like at the organizational level and at the project level and as a primer. In terms of education, and Pietro mentioned it, that both groups are working together, and that's very encouraging. Looking at BIM and Education Committee, so what does education look like in this new environment? What are the key learning outcomes that we have to, what do we have to learn? What do we have to know to do this in a better way? So an MOU has recently been signed between CanBIM and BuildingSMART to move that agenda ahead. There's a BIM and education strategy. There's also individual certification done by CanBIM, and I know that this afternoon Pietro will be talking about this education and the certification. So these are efforts to really recognize excellence and knowledge in BIM in Canada. In terms of deploying, so creating and implementing collaborative project delivery environments that foster the use of BIM in the Canadian AECO community. There's the IBC BIM contract addendum, so it's based on the AIA exhibits and the consensus docs exhibits with the model tables and so forth. Basically, it's Canadianized standard contract language for BIM, model uses, allowable uses, and so forth. And CCDC is developing an IPD contract template, so that's exciting. Basically, knowing that standard form contracts are the predominant approach, that CCDC is looking at IPD, I think is a really, really interesting thing, and we'll see what comes out from that. Two last streams, looking at evaluating, and this is sort of my pet. This is where my interest lies, really to measure and evaluate and assess the impact and maturity of BIM within the Canadian AECO industry. So we need strategies to measure and evaluate and assess BIM in Canada. So that question of the ROI and what is the cost of BIM and so forth, we can't answer that question without valuable data and consistent data. I mean, asking what is the ROI in BIM, I think I would ask more the question, what is the cost of not doing BIM? But that's another conversation. Conducting a national BIM survey, that's one of the key elements, and I'm hoping to work with CanBIM and other associations to develop this robust national survey so that we can actually know where we're at. What is the true state of BIM in Canada, so that we can speak to that and then develop policy and framework and framing this transition. Lastly, to sustain, basically to adapt and maintain the transition to BIM and collaborative project delivery practices within the Canadian AECO community. The CanBIM Awards are a great way to, case studies of excellence in BIM. There's the BIM, BSI BIM Guides wiki, so you can go and if you Google this, basically it's a wiki page of all the BIM guides that have been developed across the world. So, looking at what is being done, what are the best practices, and can we standardize a guideline to, sort of like master format or so forth. So that's it, and I'm bringing us back on time, David, so you'll be happy to that. Key takeaways, as I said, BIM is a catalyst for change. It's making us rethink how we practice and how we interact and how we collaborate. We need the appropriate regulatory and policy framework. So we have to frame that change in a way that's going to be successful and that we're moving towards a common ground. This framework is supported by three key elements: a strategy, a mandate, and standards. As I said, I think this is a good framing for a national strategy for the built environment. So as a national construction industry, as a sector as a whole, what do we strive to achieve? And you know, excellence, what does excellence mean? And of course, the roadmap is how we get there. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes. Questions? Please.
You mentioned that the UK adopted level 2 BIM. What does that mean?
You
Thank
got
you.
4 days?
Yeah. Okay. The basic premise is that they are mandating that any project that has public money attached to it will they're going to have BIM deliverables in IFC and COBE formats, so that they're creating a common data environment. They've really, the UK has developed a great infrastructure to support this transition to BIM, and basically leading up to this level 2 BIM. Level 2 BIM basically is just the fact that we're working with what we'd see like federated models, you know, open exchange, not refusing to exchange models between each other, and that there's a deliverable to the government that is a database and is structured in a manner. So they have standards, publicly available standards, PAS. Those are publicly available, so you can download them, sort of see what types of information requirements, how they structure it, what are the standards behind it. And that's why I say, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. These are available. And actually, PAS standards are going through ISO certification, so they're going to become ISO standards, hopefully, or they're hoping to. And we're going to have to see as an industry and do we want to adopt those standards, or do we want to create our own? So, but to just answer the question, what is level 2 BIM? Basically, it's a moving towards that collaborative or that common data environment with the what you'd say federated models, so multidisciplinary models speaking to each other.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. Any more questions? No? All right, we're